Canada's Challenge, The Spirit Sings and the Rivers Flow, written and delivered by David Watts. Is there such a thing as a shared Canadian spirit? Or are our attitudes regionally determined? How deeply are these views rooted? To what extent outgrowths of where we live on this half-continent? And how much set by what we say we want and stories we tell each other? Morphology, the physical structure of the land, and mythology, the mental images and sound bites we hold, come together here. In this episode, we'll look at how landforms and water flows affect our different views of the country and the half-continent we share. Yes, there are times when what we're seeking determines what we see, and our primary energy sources, hydrocarbon or hydroelectric, that differ from region to region, play a part here. But there are other areas often ignored where the spirit of the land reflects tectonics and glaciation in shared foundations of which we're less conscious in the buzz of media. Our borders are not artificial lines drawn on a map, and in this discussion we'll start with the second part of our title, How the Rivers Flow. In length and breadth of their drainage basins, the Mackenzie and the Mississippi emerged for a time as North America's largest river systems after the last ice age. The northern one encompasses the Peace, Athabasca, and Slave, all mighty rivers in their own right, the second flowing through Fort McMurray, whose naturally leaching bitumen deposits broadened with the development of the oil sands. The southern system includes the Missouri and Arkansas, with the southern Red River, Ohio, and Illinois collectively discharging into the Gulf of Mexico. Looking from above in space, these two great systems, emptying in opposite directions, seem to bisect Turtle Island, a backward slash from the Beaufort to the Gulf of Mexico. Alberta strategically straddles these systems, encompassing headwaters of each. In the southeast, below Medicine Hat and Pendant d'Arrêt, the Milk River flows through Rattlesnake Country to join the St. Mary's in Montana and Missouri downstream, and the Peace and Parsnip and Athabasca rivers in the province's northwest feed the Mackenzie River system. On the surface, then, we can see why many Albertans have a north-south view rather than an east-west one. But that's missing something. The North and South Saskatchewan rivers that, with their tributaries, flow through Alberta's largest cities, rise in the Alberta Rockies, the North Saskatchewan in the same ice field as the Athabasca, and flow east to Hudson Bay. The North Saskatchewan was a western leg of the east-west linked fur-trading voyageurs and Indigenous guides who traveled from Montreal. For those who see Alberta's interest in energy from the high Arctic to the Gulf as a 21st century one under conservative governments, here are 3 steps on the road between Leduc No. 1 in 1947 and 1980's Athabasca oil sands development. I worked at Jasper Park Lodge the summers of 1966 to 68 while attending university in Calgary. In one of these seasons, a chartered passenger train shuttled between Edmonton and Calgary on CN's secondary line east of the main corridor between the two cities, carrying oil executives negotiating contracts arising from new finds off North Shore, Alaska. The lodge was a CN hotel then, and turned its full facility over to an oilman's golf tournament every other year, alternate years at CP's Banff Springs Hotel. So the story was of interest to student staff, most of who came to work for the summer on CN rail passes from the east. The private train story was sketchy. Security agents traveled with the train and jumped off to surround it every time it stopped, keeping news media away and the company negotiators on board from communicating with the outside world. When an announcement was made later, negotiations having been completed, we recognized the mystery train we'd been following. A decade later, oil discoveries in Canada's high Arctic led to the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline Report under Mr. Justice Thomas Berger in response to Indigenous and habitat concerns on the route. Justice Berger concluded a Mackenzie Valley pipeline was feasible economically, but that there should be a 10-year moratorium on its development, allowing Indigenous people to pursue land claims as well as the infrastructures to deal with the social influx that would accompany a pipeline. In 1984, I was on a post-grad research and writing year at the University of Calgary when Shell Canada moved its corporate headquarters and hundreds of staff to Calgary from Mississauga, Ontario. I did occasional freelance pieces for Toronto Star during the year and interviewed Calgary's mayor, later Alberta's premier Ralph Klein, on his response to the news. "We'll welcome them with open arms," he said, which I reported, along with some opposition to the move that the Star's editors omitted. The North-South perspective in which many Albertans see themselves as North Americans reflect the land of the Great Central Plain from the Arctic to Texas. At right angles to this diagonal band are two contrasting landforms. Southwest, in an area that would be part of Alberta if the provincial boundary continued to follow the meridian rather than the continental divide, is the West Kootenay, whose First Nation traded with the peoples of the plain. Life here, even for the working class, is more laid back in Alberta, but not as far into the BC ethos of artists and ashrams that reaches to the coast. The Cordillera, the Rockies and ranges farther west, is also north-south, but more autonomous and less majoritarian than the bands in both Indigenous and settler stretched out on Pacific islands and inlets. Northeast of the Alberta-Saskatchewan plain is the Rocky Canadian Shield, through which most of the two provinces' rivers drain into Hudson Bay. This formation may appear eastern to Albertans, but it's not linear. It's semicircular, more exactly a spiral wrapping around the bay, topped by ancient rocks in the Arctic archipelago. Ontarians and Quebecers see themselves as shield people, with the assumption that the shield is one of our major landforms lying exclusively in Canada. Rocky terrain in the Shield, Cordillera, or Appalachians fosters a different outlook than living on a plain created by a dried-up inland sea. First, the broader horizons encourage one to look far and dream big. Next, it's easy to build in clay sediment. Assuming one is not atop an aquifer or quicksand, building on the plains is based on bids, a safe gamble. Building on rock requires blasting or drilling and pinning and is often on a cost-plus basis. These routes show the difference between a can-do, buoyant optimism of the plains and the caution needed in rocky and coastal areas. We now begin to see the basis of two distinct ways of looking at our country, both growing out of the land we live on, something Indigenous people and agricultural settlers share while they take different views on the land, one as an entity to be partnered with, the other a commodity to be cultivated. This is reinforced by the sources of electrical energy that grow out of the topography of each region. As we realize the roots of these differing views, we may wonder if they present us with an either-or choice, something being increasingly asked for on the prairies, or whether there is a framework in which they can be compatible, even if divergent. Before we attempt to answer this question, we need to look at an event on the threshold border between prehistory and history, one that significantly affected our land and continues to affect the direction of our outlook. This was an event that grew out of the rebound from the last glacial period and sculpted the lay of the land and the roots of the waters that crisscross and connect it. At a now identifiable point, 12,200 years ago, a significant shift took place in the Turtle Island landscape, altering the flow of major eastern waterways in a way that would affect the political map of North America in the post-contact period. The upper half of the continent was physically rebounding from a long glaciation. Meltwater was filling basins of the Great Lakes the receding glaciers had gouged out. At first, all 5 lakes drained south to the Mississippi. Then the water, rising faster from the melting than the land that was also rising, free of the weight of the ice pack, created a super lake that cut a channel through what's now North Bay, Ontario, to drain through the Ottawa River into the Atlantic Champlain Sea. The Ottawa River is 3,000 to 5,000 years older than the St. Lawrence, twice as deep from following a fault line in the North American plate, and broadened by the flushing from the temporary overflow of the upper Great Lakes. For a time, rising land to the south diverted Lakes Erie and Ontario's drain eastward into the Hudson-Mohawk River system in what's now New York State. Had either drainage system, south to the Mississippi or east to the Hudson, continued, the south populated band of Ontario would have been geographically oriented and probably politically integrated into what became the United States. Instead, east-west connecting of the lakes with a single outlet cut a new channel northeast of the Atlantic through what's the St. Lawrence Valley, including the older, deeper Ottawa River, the fault line between provinces and populations of respective language groups. What the French called the River of Canada is now, by volume of discharge, North America's second largest river, following the Mississippi and ahead of the Mackenzie that covers a larger drainage basin. The bisecting of the eastern half of the continent was not merely by an artificial line agreed upon by the founders of the United States, whose western boundary then extended only as far as the Mississippi, but a topographical one created by a series of large interconnecting bodies of water draining through the continent's second largest river. North of that river lived a people of another language and culture, the former New France, who declined to join Americans' revolution and who did not share the revolutionaries' enthusiasm for Republican ideals. Had there not been this natural division in the East, or had the victorious 13 colonies expanded further westward, the case to claim what would become the Northern Plains would be stronger. But with a continuing British naval base to the north, peaceful competition for the West beyond the lakes, as in the later joint occupation agreement for the Oregon Territory, became a fair compromise. The emergence of the Great Lakes as an east-west connection system, with the exception of Michigan, coincides with the formation of Niagara Falls, straddling the Canada-US border and breaching the Niagara Escarpment, a ridge that arose when the weight of ice receded. Before, water passed between Lakes Erie and Ontario at a number of small overflows. Thanks to Poland dating of the strata, the fall's origin has been fixed to a point that coincides with human occupation of the region, and there are stories of their formation in indigenous Glooscap legends of a battle for the waters between a genie of the lakes and a genie of the Atlantic. Anthropologists have learned better than to dismiss such stories as inventions. Multiple stories of an event point to a common route. Paraphrasing Buffalo Springfield's, "Something was happening here, even if what it was ain't exactly clear." Yes, there is a Canada-US border. Mythology and morphology agree here. If we're about to challenge or differentiate between them, citing differences on either side of the border, it's a good idea to consult First Nations keepers of the legends. The Haudenosaunee, whose forays north on the Richelieu River are prominent in stories of New France, demanded and received the right of free passage across the U.S. border after its independence, at a section where the physical border is most obvious. Their western counterparts, Siksika, Anishinaabe, and Lakota, were used to move with the bison on the Great Plain where there was no visible demarcation. Yet Plains First Nations, who also have right of unrestricted passage, developed an appreciation of the invisible spiritual medicine line between the territory of the red-coat Mounties of the Great Mother and the blue-coated Long Knives of the Father in Washington. Whatever their issues with impacts of colonization, it's significant that they are virtually unanimous in opposing American annexation and Western separation that they see as a step on the road to the same end. Canada's mid-20th century mythology became one of an intermediary, looking for and facilitating compromise to resolve difficulties. It's worth looking at 3 exceptions where our leaders drew a firm line in the sand on an issue. After American cancellation of a 12-year trade agreement with British North American provinces that led to 4 and another 3 soon after confederating as the Dominion of Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald was resolutely opposed to any attempt to reopen the door to economic integration with the United States that he saw as a slippery slope to annexation. When the Liberal Party platform proposed unrestricted reciprocity in the 1891 election, Sir John came out swinging. "With my utmost, with my last breath, I will oppose the veiled treason which attempts to lure our people from their allegiance. During my long public service of nearly half a century, I have been true to my country and its best interests, and I appeal with equal confidence to those who have trusted me in the past, and to the young hope of the future to give me their united and strenuous aid in this my last effort." His references to my utmost breath and last effort were prophetic. Sir John fell ill from the stress and exertion of the campaign and died 3 months later. His Liberal opponent and later successor, Wilfrid Laurier, respected Sir John and followed his lead in some respects. But after winning 4 back-to-back majorities, a record unsurpassed by any of our other prime ministers, Sir Wilfrid felt secure to reopen the issue of free trade with the U.S. In the third campaign, Conservative leader Robert Borden fought against Sir Wilfrid. Borden was tempted to let the issue pass. But his taking the risk to fight free trade as the issue of the 1911 election showed Canadians' loyalties to their country outweighed the popularity of their leaders. Canadians' third response to the power of a simple no came on the issue of Quebec separatism under Pierre Elliott Trudeau. At a time when the nationalist wave was rising among young Québécois and Québécoises, and the two main federal political parties were flirting with the two nations theory to attract youth, Trudeau, as federal justice minister, came to the attention of Canadians in a spirited debate with Quebec Premier Daniel Johnson at a federal provincial conference. 3 months later, as a result, he became Liberal leader and Prime Minister. 18 months later, he won the support of Canadians in all regions and of both language groups in his unblinking response to terrorist kidnapping by cells of a Quebec liberation organization. And his return from retirement to oppose the Distinct Society Clause in the Mulroney-Meech Lake Accord galvanized even Western Canadians who had never liked him but who agreed with his stand. 60 years after the terrorist crises, 30 since we've had free trade with the U.S. in one form or another, and 115 since an election when we voted down free trade, we wonder what the fuss was about. Many from past generations, even Liberals, see Pierre Trudeau as rigid. We've had free trade for 4 decades, though we found it comes at a cost when we try to renegotiate it. The 2000 Clarity Act sets out rules under which a province can move to secede from the Federation. It's no longer treason to talk about. Why do the past stands we've taken matter today? First is the matter of context. If such a choice were to be made democratically after free and open debate, without outside interference, financially or by force, this is something we could accept, though with regret by some. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper said recently that if he were still in office and faced with such pressure, he'd choose to impoverish the country rather than submit to takeover. Second is a matter of motive. Sir John A. and Robert Borden knew that while free trade was acceptable to many Canadians as a matter of economic union, its U.S. proponents saw it as a prelude to political union. For that reason, they rejected it. Similarly, in 1963, when Canada-U.S. relations were at a low ebb, most visibly over the issue of nuclear arms on Canadian soil, since removed, the U.S. interfered in Canada's general election in order to have a more compliant government in Ottawa. A memo by the then U.S. Undersecretary of State concluded Canada was, quote, resisting the inevitable of economic and probably political integration as well. In the light of the long-term record, the U.S. Treasury Secretary's current intervention on behalf of the separatist movement in Alberta should come as no surprise. And the 1963 intervention file shows that for every overt act of interference, there are 3 to 4 times as many covert acts taking place out of public view. Is there a shared spirit in our constellation of provinces, territories, and First Nations? The fluidity inherent in the constellation metaphor in the question is one answer. The live and let live elusiveness of the Canadian experience is an asset. We can describe it in many ways, but no one can capture it. Our lack of defining moments, such as revolution and civil war, has spared us straitjackets of imposed national unity. We have to live with the ambiguities of overlapping jurisdictions, a charter of rights and freedoms, and a parliamentary override provision, a lack of a one-size-fits-all that allows provinces to develop areas of sovereignty that fit their own needs. We're learning as much from our mistakes as from our achievements. Our name means village in the Algonquian language family. People in a village have to live with each other even when they don't like each other, a part of the village experience it takes to raise a child. The other part of our official name we seldom use now is unique, the first time it was used as a nation-state. It's about trusteeship, dominion over a land, not domination of it. Think of it. A kingdom has a king or queen, a principality, a prince or princess, a duchy, a duke or duchess. But a dominion has no dominatrix. The sheer sound is ridiculous. Learning by trial and error, we've come to see that the West will not be dominated by central Canada or BC by Alberta. Quebec will not be dominated by the rest of Canada on a majority basis. Rural and town dwellers do not want to be dominated by urban regulations. Our many First Nations in their diversity don't want to be pushed or told to come up with a common front on pipelines or resource development. Answers to what we oppose appear in taking time to listen to and learn from each other. Any would-be ruler who tried to take us over would be exposing and opening cracks in their own foundation. Though it may be suppressed for a time, the village spirit cannot be conquered. Those who seem to have been taken in the past are standing stronger in the knowledge of who they are than the rest of us. Canada's challenge can be faced in the strength of self-knowledge that keeps us open to the source from which other resources come. Remembering who we are and what we're about, we can avoid reacting indiscriminately. Gandhi's formula of combining the power of a simple no with non-violent resistance was more effective in getting Britain out of India than counterinsurgencies the US has faced. Domination by an individual, idea, or institution gives free rein to dark drives that are kept in check by limits of being in relationship. That's what absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely means. Without restraint, you're left with depravity. What follows Acton's oft-quoted line is not so well known. Great men, therefore, are almost always bad men. He's talking of those who claim or seek greatness as a goal, not those later acclaimed for their contribution to their fellow human beings. In this context, the meek shall inherit the earth is not fantasy but fact. Those who go about their lives without pretensions, cooperatively with others, will be left standing when dictators are brought down by their egos and ambitions. Dr. Seuss's American Children's Story tells of a turtle whose greed for power led to a pyramid of subject turtles who supported him, so I can be king of all that I see. That's not really a story about turtles, but of deranged human tyrants. Let's review the recent history of Turtle Island. 33 years after Britain set out to break French power in the New World, U.S. delegates met in Paris to try to break the back of British power in North America. The Monroe Doctrine and its newest edition are U.S. attempts to break or absorb any them seen as a challenge. In the words of Pete Seeger's song, "When Will We Ever Learn?" North America, ancestral homeland First Nations call Turtle Island, can never be conquered. The turtle, with its resilience and lifespan, has outlasted the empires that have tried to take it. leaving those people who lived with it in respect. In a spirit not self-righteous, but admitting past failures and unfinished business, we can be open to the free souls who live below the belt of Turtle Island. Let us include the symbol of the turtle, beside that of the beaver, who live in the water and work with the land in a country with the world's longest coastline and greatest reserves of fresh water, assets and gifts we pledge to protect. I close with thoughts from a turtle experience during a 1982-83 teacher exchange in Laval, Quebec. Laval is one of the many islands at the joining of the Ottawa and St. Lawrence rivers, an island that is a habitat for many of the turtles in the valley. Being from Alberta, I wasn't used to finding turtles in the wild. Passing one when biking caught me by surprise. I dedicate this to the spirit of our country, the continent we share with people who see the turtle's vulnerability as a strength, and the planet we share. Thoughts on finding a wounded turtle by the roadside. While speeding by bicycle along the roadside, it caught my eye. A symmetrical shape, bright colors, indentations like a child's toy. 40 paces beyond, the impression still persisted, and I stopped. Backpedaled, then gingerly, still astride my bike, walked, straddled, backwards along the shoulder, looking over my shoulder to avoid oncoming traffic, and also down to avoid the whatever it was back there. And then I was there, beside it. Not a toy, but a real live turtle, or at least a once live or recently live one. It was on its back, pulled in except for one flipper, and that splayed and still occasionally feebly contracting, though whether from shock or rigor mortis I could not tell. I picked it up, admired the still bright green and orange-yellow markings, and looked inside. The eyes were still open, the head partially enfolded in turtleneck, the nostrils besmeared with mucus. Or was it with blood? I never knew turtles had red blood. I don't know what I expected, green perhaps. But strange how discovering that created an instant sense of kinship, as if blood color had any more importance than skin color. I placed it right side up in the grass, at the edge of the gravel shoulder, symbol of longevity, durability, vanquisher of the boastful. Please, come out, live, and carry the world on your back another 500 years.